Welcome to another movie plot. After a difficult defeat at the hands of the resurrected Count Dracula, the vampire hunter Uffizi was infected and found barely breathing by the coroner Luke. The Count also took the woman that Luke loves, Liz, but after 5 years Luke still hasn't found her and is now a vampire hunter using his own blood to attract his prey. They're much faster than him, but armed with a stake he's able to avoid too much damage until a larger one gives him some trouble. The pair of bloodsuckers begin playing with their food, unaware that he was leading them to Uffizi, who saves his bait from being eaten. He uses his modified scythe to lop off the larger's head and uses a spear gun to stop the terrified female from fleeing. With the threat of a train approaching, the hunter questions her for the location of Dracula, until we cut to a monastery in Italy where Father Uffizi's telling Cardinal Siqueros that Dracula's returned to Transylvania. He asks for permission to hunt him down, but the church has become worried that Uffizi's tainted following his defeat to Dracula. They deny the permission, so the hunter hands in his collar to pursue Dracula alone without the parish's approval. He travels to Romania with his barbed bullwhip and brings his sidekick Luke along for the journey. The country's in the middle of a civil war and everyone's too afraid of collaborators to speak with each other even during the day. The boys talk about getting Liz back while retrieving their weapons and vehicle for the hunt. Across the country, the reporter Julia says that the rebels accuse NATO of supporting a shadow government run by agents of darkness, and demand that all of their officials make public appearances during the daylight to prove otherwise. Because of the war, no one can exit the city, so Uffizi and Luke are stopped at a checkpoint to request permission. A jeep pulls up with a mortified French soldier saying they were attacked outside the city by people with big teeth. Uffizi goes to inspect their dead comrade for bite marks when the third soldier points a gun at him but decides to off himself instead over the horrors he's seen. Finally, out of the city, Luke asks Uffizi why he never uses the name Dracula, but the holy man says that it isn't his real name, and is just a conceit that the monster uses because it inspires terror. He goes on to list other names he's gone by but never once says the origin of Judas Iscariot, and just that it doesn't matter where it all began. They drive through the night until reaching some burning effigies and wonder if it means the locals know they're coming. Luke freaks out as they begin to get surrounded by undead, but Uffizi's unafraid of the lesser vamps and takes over driving to let the rookie sleep. The next morning they pass a group of rebels led by Bogdan rounding up the locals into a truck that Luke decides to do something about. He forces Uffizi to halt the car so that they can take them by surprise and make the rebels free all of the hostages. After helping, Uffizi translates that they're not really rebels but procurers who sell people to vampires as trade for their own lives. Because of the increase in undead and reducing numbers of living, the business has become heavily relied on by the vampires, but Bogdan claims not to have seen Liz. When taking the procurer back to their car, one of his men blow it up, allowing Bogdan to escape into the woods in their distraction. Uffizi and Luke proceed on foot into the first town where all of the inhabitants are dead after attending an ill-fated circus. After they've burned all the bodies to prevent resurrections, a young disheveled boy wanders past them in one direction while a helicopter goes down in the other. Luke goes for the kid while Uffizi checks for survivors of the down chopper, discovering it to be Julia and her cameraman Tommy, who crashed after their power went out. Their pilot saved their lives but is mortally wounded, while the two reporters take shelter in a church to recover. Elsewhere, Luke's caught up to the kid but doesn't make it in time to slay his vampiric mother before she bites him. Luke puts the mother down, then is required to put a stake in the kid to prevent another vamp before heading back to the church to find the two scared strangers. Julia says that they just came there to report from the rebels' side of the story but had no idea how bad things really were. Tommy puts on a recording to prove that they were attacked during one of their interviews, but the footage shows no one but themselves. Realizing that Julia's missing, Tommy runs off into the church cemetery alone to look for her but is suddenly snatched from above. Uffizi has waited with the pilot until he died, all the while being tempted by the blood as he's clearly tainted. He's being stalked by other vampires but goes on to bury the man and is met by Julia, who's come to say a few kind words about the deceased. Afterwards they go back to the church, but hearing from Luke that Tommy's missing, Uffizi goes off alone to find him. He comes across a vampire on stilts sucking Tommy's blood and a smaller circus performer that he cuts in half. The torso and stilted vamp both still nearly get the better of him, but a stilt gets stuck in a grate, allowing Uffizi to impale the woman and break one of the stilts, causing the vamp to fall on her heart first. Tommy's now resurrected and disappeared, as Luke gets back to the church to find the door now left open. He goes to inspect it when Julia's attacked by a completely different vampire that almost bites her, but using a wall for leverage it's clumsily staked by Luke. They take refuge inside but soon hear Tommy banging and decide to open the doors to let him in. He's tricked them and tries to bite Julia, but she accidentally rings the church bells, causing the undead pain, giving Luke a chance to shoot him through the skull with his spear gun and send him falling into a basin of holy water. The next morning Julia wakes up to the screams of all the vampires caught outside during sunrise. The pair are met by Uffizi, who's found a military jeep for him and Luke to drive north in, while Julia takes a car back to civilization. There's an obvious attraction between her and Uffizi, but she gets startled when she sees that he's fighting off the infection himself. After driving for a while, Luke makes Uffizi stop at another obvious trap where a strange woman gives him a baby bomb, almost getting them both killed. She's part of the resistance and takes the two outsiders back to their headquarters in an old army bunker beneath the mountain. Their leader Gabriel laughs at their story of hunting Dracula and doesn't even believe he exists until seeing Uffizi's red eyes. Just then Julia enters, having returned to vouch for the hunters and wanting some kind of evidence of vampires to make her story believable. The rebels throw Uffizi and Luke into the dungeons just to be safe, but during the night the bunker's attacked by dozens of vampires. All of the rebels are massacred, but Julia manages to free Uffizi, who locks her and Luke inside the cell until he can find them a way out. They're left with the keys, but when Luke tries to help, one of the bloodsuckers keeps him trapped inside until morning. Uffizi locates his weapons and goes on to spend the rest of the night eliminating every single vampire in the facility. The next morning Julia finds him purging in the sunlight, a task that he's required to do every morning to prevent the infection from taking him over, but always expects to burst into ashes. The group come across the same procurers from earlier delivering another batch of humans and decide to follow them in their jeep. They pull up at a dozen priests impaled on pikes, where Uffizi orders Luke to take Julia back to town. He says that Luke's girl's already gone and that continuing on would be a commitment to death, but expecting the worst anyway, they're both determined to continue. The three reach Dracula's castle and view the procurers handing over meatbags to the guards. Suddenly Bogdan flanks them, shooting Uffizi off the side of the cliff and knocking Luke unconscious. They take Julia prisoner and trap Luke at the castle with the same group of recaptured survivors from earlier. They stand around the feeding grounds waiting to be slaughtered. So when night falls, Luke climbs the walls to lead the others to safety, but a swarm of vampires exit the castle and begin ripping them all to pieces. The only survivor enters the castle and finds his way to the throne room, that's filled with television sets picking up channels from all around the world. He shouts Julia's name when her lifeless body's tossed to the ground, stripped of clothes and covered in blood. Emerging from a swarm of bats is a much older looking Dracula who's been hooked up to blood tubes for the past 5 years to recover his strength. He remembers Luke from their previous run-in and threatens to bite him right then and there. Instead, he tosses him into a pit filled with dozens of his vampires, all feeding on the villagers. They're all kept in a trance until the Count requires them to do his bidding, allowing Luke to search through the mass of flesh until finding his girl Liz. The first of Dracula's new batch of brides, she's been kept feeding at the back of the pit and refuses to go with Luke by knocking him unconscious. Meanwhile, Uffizi begins to heal and rides on the castle to find Bogdan and another procurer stripping his jeep. He detaches their limbs with his bullwhip and enters the castle to begin searching for Dracula. Inside the throne room, Julia wakes to find herself clothed in the dress of Dracula's favorite bride. The Count recognizes her from TV and tells her about his growing army of vampires that he'll use to take over once he's fully recovered. Finally, Uffizi locates the throne room but finds Julia lying on the floor impaled by a stake. The hunter removes it when Dracula shows up to ask the priest if he even speaks with God's authority anymore. Then when Uffizi impales him with his silver scythe, it's revealed that he doesn't. It seems like all hope's lost, as despite the hunter being equally as fast, Dracula's now immune to anything he throws at him. He easily defeats the hunter, but before plunging his sword into him reveals that it's no longer God's fault for his immortality, but Uffizi, as he's not willing to pass forgiveness on to the Count and therefore can't destroy him. So when Liz impales her captor with a burning stake, it gives Uffizi the opportunity to jump on Dracula's back and bite into his neck. After recovering his own strength, Uffizi takes Dracula's sword and passes God's forgiveness onto him before landing the finishing blow. A still vampiric Liz takes the sword and walks over to an approaching Luke to ask him to do the same. He takes some convincing and Liz even thinks of turning him, but he's eventually willing to cut down the woman he loves and returns to the throne room. A dying Julia confesses to Uffizi that she's had impure thoughts about the priest, which he verbalizes that he reciprocates before she bleeds out in his arms. Luke stumbles out of the castle and looks back for Uffizi, who doesn't come, and instead sits on the throne with a bitten Julia resurrecting and presumably becomes the new Dracula. And the movie ends.